The Ptolemies, one of the most controversial and captivating dynasties of the ancient world, left their mark on history not only through their political power struggles, but also through their extraordinary family ties. Among them, the most unforgettable figure is undoubtedly Cleopatra. Her story is not merely that of a queen, it is the tale of an empire's downfall, the final act of a cursed dynasty marching toward its inevitable end. Seated upon Egypt's golden throne, this queen etched her name into the pages of history not only through her intelligence, beauty, and defiance against Rome, but also through her marriages within her own bloodline. Cleopatra's life is the perfect fusion of love and politics, passion and curse, grandeur and tragedy. To understand Cleopatra's story, we must first look back 3 centuries. For her destiny was not shaped solely by personal choices, but by the bloody and cursed traditions of the dynasty into which she was born. When Alexander the Great died in Babylon in 323 BC, he left behind a vast empire. His generals turned on one another to claim pieces of it. Amidst this struggle, one of his most loyal commanders, Ptolemy, seized control of Egypt. By taking possession of Alexander's body and bringing it to Egypt, he strengthened his authority over the people. When he proclaimed himself Pharaoh, a Greek family had become the new rulers of Egypt. Yet the rule the Ptolemies brought to Egypt was both fascinating and horrifying. They upheld the traditions of the pharaohs, but mixed them with the customs of the Greek world. The most dangerous of these customs was their obsession with preserving the purity of the royal bloodline. The royal family could not marry commoners, for that would taint their divine blood. The solution was far more shocking. Brothers married sisters, mothers married sons. Because of this tradition, the Ptolemaic dynasty descended into corruption. Family bonds were not built on love or loyalty, but on power and ambition. Every child born was seen as a future rival in the battle for the throne. Siblings poisoned one another, spouses sent each other into exile, and mothers even murdered their own children. The palace walls gleamed with gold, but within them a ceaseless struggle for power stained everything with blood. Long before Cleopatra's birth, this curse had already taken root. Ptolemy II married his own sister. Ptolemy IV killed most of his relatives to secure his throne. By the reign of Ptolemy VII, sibling wars had nearly torn Egypt apart. With every generation came new betrayals, new murders, and new curses. One of the final links in this dreadful chain was Cleopatra's father, Ptolemy II. History remembers him as Auletes, the flute player, but behind the nickname was a weak and ineffectual ruler. He had become dependent on Rome and crushed his people with heavy taxes. Under his reign, Egypt's former glory began to fade. Inside the palace, intrigues multiplied, while outside, the people struggled with hunger and despair. When Ptolemy XIII died, he left behind a kingdom in chaos. His children were expected to rule Egypt together, but the dynastic rule was clear. Cleopatra could not reign alone. She needed a male consort, and that consort would be none other than her younger brother. While still a young woman, Cleopatra was forced to marry her child brother, Ptolemy XIII. This was not a union of love, but of necessity, a product of the dynasty's decayed traditions. And thus began Cleopatra's tragedy. She possessed intelligence, ambition, and willpower, but her fate was shackled within the cursed chain of blood. With her father's death, Cleopatra suddenly found herself on one of the most dangerous thrones in the world. From the outside, Egypt's throne appeared golden, magnificent, and untouchable. But in truth, to sit upon it was like drinking from a cup filled with poison. For in the Ptolemaic dynasty, the crown symbolized not only power, but also endless betrayal and the constant fear of death. The dynasty's rule was strict. A woman could never reign alone. At barely 18, Cleopatra was forced into marriage with her younger brother, Ptolemy III, who was only 10 years old. To the people, this union was presented as a divine marriage, but in reality it was artificial, cold, and devoid of love. The tradition that claimed a woman could not rule with her own mind and will had shackled Cleopatra to her own blood. But Cleopatra was no ordinary queen. She had received years of exceptional education. She grew up in the palace libraries, conversing with philosophers and scholars. She mastered Greek literature, medicine, and astronomy. She could speak many languages: Greek, Latin, Hebrew, Aramaic, and most importantly, she spoke the language that few in her dynasty knew, the tongue of the Egyptian people. This rare ability allowed her to connect directly with peasants in the fields, priests in the temples, and merchants in the markets. To the common people, Cleopatra was not just a ruler, but a sacred figure. Inside the palace, however, things were far darker. The young king's advisors saw Cleopatra's popularity with the people as a threat. They wanted to hold the real power of Egypt in their own hands. To them, Cleopatra's intelligence was not a gift, but a dangerous weapon. They blocked her decisions, undermined her authority, and plotted to remove her. Conflict quickly escalated. Though she officially shared the throne with her brother, Cleopatra sought to rule independently. Her determination stirred jealousy and fear within the palace. The advisors decided to act. They rallied around the boy king's authority and struck. Cleopatra was stripped of her throne and exiled from her kingdom. Her life collapsed overnight. She was cast out from the glittering palaces and opulent feasts, left with only a handful of loyal servants. The once mighty queen became a fugitive in foreign lands. But Cleopatra was not a woman who surrendered to misfortune. For her, exile was not the end. It was the beginning of a rebirth. At that very moment, across the Mediterranean, a new giant was rising: Rome. No longer just a city-state, Rome had become the force shaping the destiny of the world. Its generals had long cast greedy eyes on Egypt's wealth, for the bounty of the Nile was indispensable to Rome's ambitions. Cleopatra understood a hard truth. Her path back to the throne lay not solely in Egyptian alliances, but in gaining the support of Rome itself. And so into Cleopatra's life stepped one of history's most powerful men, Julius Caesar. Their meeting would change not only her fate, but the destiny of an entire civilization. For Cleopatra, exile may have seemed like a downfall, but in truth, it became the period that sharpened her resolve and her intellect. She had been stripped of her throne, yes, but she had not been defeated. Born on the banks of the Nile and raised amid the intrigues of the Ptolemaic palace, she was determined to find a way to reclaim the power she had lost. While staying in the eastern lands of Syria, Cleopatra did not sit idle. With a handful of loyal servants and supporters, she began to plan. She knew all too well that a child king and his greedy advisors could never truly govern Egypt. The people were starving, taxes were rising, and the prestige of the throne was crumbling before Rome's shadow. In such a climate, Cleopatra's return to power was not simply a matter of ambition, it was a necessity. Yet Cleopatra faced a greater reality: Rome. At that time, the Roman Republic stood on the brink of civil war. Julius Caesar and Pompey Magnus were locked in a relentless struggle for supremacy, a conflict that shook the entire Mediterranean. Egypt's fertile lands and overflowing treasury made it a prize both men coveted. Cleopatra turned her gaze firmly toward Rome. She realized that choosing the right side in this struggle would be the key to her restoration. If she could win Caesar's support, she would not only reclaim Egypt's throne, but rise as one of the most powerful women in the Mediterranean. But if she chose wrongly, she risked becoming the last ruler of a dying dynasty. Meanwhile, Egypt itself was unraveling. Young Ptolemy the Thegned was guided not by his own will, but by the hands of scheming advisors. This inner circle, fearful of Cleopatra's return, tightened their grip on the boy king, but Rome's war would shatter their plans. After his defeat, Pompey fled across the sea, and sought refuge in Egypt, believing it a safe haven and the land of former allies. Yet the boy king's counselors denied him safety. Instead, desperate to win Caesar's favor, they made a ruthless choice. Pompey was murdered. This single act sealed Egypt's fate. Pompey's severed head was presented to Caesar as a gift, but instead of gratitude, the Roman general was filled with disgust. Though Pompey had been his bitter rival, he was still one of Rome's most respected leaders. To Caesar, the murder was not an act of loyalty, but of dishonor. In his eyes, the young king and his advisors branded themselves as treacherous and unworthy allies. At that moment, Cleopatra recognized her chance. The most powerful man in the world was in Egypt, but surrounded by cowards and traitors. She would take the risk of a lifetime to place herself before Caesar, to captivate him, and to win his support. Legend tells us that Cleopatra had herself smuggled into Caesar's quarters, rolled inside a luxurious carpet, and when unfurled, she stood before him. This daring entrance was not merely a dramatic gesture to regain her throne. It was the opening act of one of history's greatest stories of love and power. Caesar, confronted with the young queen, was struck not only by her beauty, but by her intelligence and determination. Cleopatra radiated the presence of a true sovereign, not a fallen exile. She spoke with the wisdom of a ruler and the confidence of one who understood both politics and destiny. Caesar recognized immediately that she was far more than an ambitious woman. She was a leader. And so, with Caesar's backing, Cleopatra began her return. What had started as exile and humiliation now transformed into the first steps of restoration. She had secured the support of Rome's greatest general. Ahead of her lay battles, betrayals, and the endless intrigues of empire. But now, Cleopatra was writing her own destiny. Caesar quickly assessed the situation in Egypt. The conflict between the siblings had weakened the country and threatened Rome's interests. For Caesar, a stable Egypt was essential. Its wealth was Rome's granary. Supporting Cleopatra was both politically wise and in Rome's best interest. Yet this decision would upend the delicate balance within the palace. Young Ptolemy the Thean and his advisors were furious that Caesar sided with Cleopatra. They still intended to govern Egypt for their own gain. But now they faced not just a queen returning from exile, but Rome's most powerful general. What had begun as a dynastic dispute became a fight for survival. The battle erupted in Alexandria, the heart of Egypt. Known to history as the Battle of Alexandria, this conflict would decide both Cleopatra's return to the throne and Rome's influence in the region. Caesar's troops clashed with Ptolemy's forces in the city's narrow streets. Ships along the harbor were set ablaze, libraries caught fire, and the grand structures of Alexandria were shrouded in smoke and chaos. Through it all, Cleopatra stood resolutely beside Caesar. For her, this was more than a political struggle. It was a battle for her very existence. To lose meant never reclaiming the throne, perhaps even losing her life. To win meant leaving an indelible mark on both Egyptian and Roman history. The fighting dragged on for months, but Caesar's strategy and the discipline of the Roman legions prevailed. Ptolemy the Thean was defeated along the banks of the Nile. Attempting to flee, he drowned, removing Cleopatra's greatest rival. The throne now belonged to Cleopatra. Yet according to Ptolemaic tradition, a male consort was still required. She married her younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, but everyone knew that real power rested entirely with Cleopatra. By her side stood Rome's most formidable man, Julius Caesar. During his stay in Egypt, Caesar's relationship with Cleopatra deepened. Their union was more than a political alliance. It became a love story for the ages. Soon, Cleopatra gave birth to Caesar's child, Ptolemy XV, known to the people as Caesarion. This boy symbolized the future of both Egypt and Rome. Cleopatra was now more than a queen restored to her throne. She had forged a blood bond with Rome, becoming the most powerful woman in the Mediterranean. Yet, her newfound power brought new enemies. Roman senators, wary of Caesar's rise, began to see Cleopatra as a dangerous foreign influence. Her victories in Egypt sent shockwaves through Roman politics. For Cleopatra, however, the most important goal remained the survival of her dynasty and the security of her son's future. In her eyes, Caesar was not only a lover, but also a partner capable of shaping the fate of empires. At this point, Cleopatra's story was no longer confined to Egypt. It was reaching into the very heart of Rome. And ahead lay even more challenging years: Caesar's assassination, new struggles for power in Rome, and the epic saga that would unfold with Mark Antony. Cleopatra's first steps in Rome went down in history as one of the most dramatic moments of her life, both politically and personally. Though she had reclaimed her throne and escaped the threats of her younger brother and the palace advisors, the security of Egypt and the future of her dynasty remained fragile. Using her position alongside Julius Caesar, Cleopatra now had to craft a strategy that would not only secure Egypt, but also influence the fate of the entire Mediterranean. As Caesar prepared to return to Rome, he offered to take Cleopatra with him. This offer was both an honor and a risk. The Roman people and Senate were uneasy about a foreign queen maintaining such close ties with Caesar. Every eye followed Cleopatra as she stepped into Rome, every gesture scrutinized, every move a subject of speculation. As one of the most powerful women of the Mediterranean, her presence was impossible to ignore. Upon arriving in Rome, Cleopatra quickly made herself accepted through both her intellect and charisma. Every step she took in court ceremonies, the Senate, and among the people carried a message. She remained the Pharaoh of Egypt, but understood that her power could be solidified with Rome's support. For some senators, this influence posed a threat, as Cleopatra's presence could rival Caesar's authority. During this period, the bond between Caesar and Cleopatra deepened. Their relationship evolved beyond politics into a romantic connection. Cleopatra needed Rome's military might and Caesar's political support to govern Egypt effectively, while Caesar gained a powerful ally to strengthen his influence across the Mediterranean. This partnership soon bore tangible results. Cleopatra consolidated her prestige in Rome while securing her throne in Egypt. During her time in Rome, Cleopatra gave birth to a child with Caesar, Ptolemy XV, widely known as Caesarion. His birth was more than a family matter. It was a symbolic and political statement, representing the intertwined futures of Egypt and Rome. For Cleopatra, Caesarion was an insurance policy for her dynasty, ensuring the continuation of her line. Simultaneously, his existence helped ease some suspicion in Rome and reinforced her power with Caesar's support. Yet the situation was far from secure. The Senate and certain generals in Rome viewed her presence as a threat. Cleopatra's closeness to Caesar became a tool for his rivals, one that could be manipulated to weaken him. Cleopatra had to safeguard Egypt while carefully navigating the treacherous political currents of Rome. She deployed her intelligence, charisma, and strategic skill to their fullest extent. During her years in Rome, Cleopatra attended countless meetings, resolved political intrigues, and worked to maintain Caesar's trust while positioning Egypt as a potent power in the Mediterranean. Behind the palaces and forums, she observed the empire's most secret political maneuvers, calculating every move. For her, warfare was no longer fought with spears and swords. It was waged with words, strategy, and alliances. Cleopatra's success in Rome went beyond reclaiming her throne. It established her as a diplomatic force capable of preserving Egypt's independence. Yet even greater challenges lay ahead. Caesar's assassination and the resulting power vacuum in Rome would once again place Egypt and Cleopatra at risk. These trials would ultimately set the stage for her legendary alliance with Mark Antony, shaping the next chapter of her extraordinary story. The assassination of Caesar in Rome shattered Cleopatra's world overnight. For her, it was not only the loss of a lover, but the beginning of a struggle to protect Egypt and her dynasty's future. After Caesar's death, Rome teetered on the brink of civil war. Senators and generals engaged in ruthless battles for power. Cleopatra was no longer simply a queen. She had to rule with both intelligence and courage, guiding her strategy with precision. She acted swiftly. Returning to Egypt was imperative because Rome's uncontrolled power in the aftermath of Caesar's assassination threatened the stability of the Ptolemaic dynasty. The fertile lands of the Nile, Egypt's treasures, and the loyalty of her people were in her hands, but within the palace, old enemies and schemers still lingered. Cleopatra, drawing on the experience and wisdom gained during her years of exile, anticipated these threats before they could manifest. Her return to Egypt was both a triumph and a calculated diplomatic move. She arrived as a queen backed by Rome, ready to reclaim her throne. This time she was not alone. She brought her son Caesarion, born of Caesar, and a circle of loyal advisors. For Cleopatra, this homecoming was not merely political. It was vital for securing the continuity of her dynasty. During this period, she had to navigate Egypt's internal conflicts with care. Ptolemy XIV, her younger brother, remained the official co-ruler, but true power rested entirely in Cleopatra's hands. The palace's old advisors and aristocrats were forced to acknowledge her authority. Her intelligence, strategic decisions, and strong connection with the people proved decisive in the struggle for the throne. Meanwhile, a new power was emerging in Rome, Mark Antony. Following Caesar's death, Antony, as part of the triumvirate, sought to tilt the balance of power across the Mediterranean in his favor. For Cleopatra, forming a relationship with Antony, much like her bond with Caesar, was both a romantic connection and a political alliance. Cleopatra deployed her diplomatic acumen to capture Antony's attention and to balance Egypt's interests with those of Rome. Her plan was simple yet daring: influence Rome's most powerful generals, secure Egypt's independence, and protect her son's inheritance. Her alliance with Antony would alter the political landscape of Rome and restore Egypt to the center of Mediterranean power. It was at this moment that Cleopatra's story began to enter the realm of legend. Palace intrigues on one side, the complex politics of Rome on the other, all managed by the intelligence, courage, and charisma of a single queen. She was no longer just the ruler of Egypt. She had become a force capable of shaping the destiny of the entire Mediterranean. Cleopatra's meeting with Mark Antony marked a turning point that would fundamentally reshape the destinies of both Egypt and Rome. After Caesar's assassination, Rome was engulfed in political chaos. Civil wars and power struggles among senators and generals threatened the stability of the city and the empire. Amid this turmoil, Cleopatra needed to make a strategic move to protect Egypt's independence and secure the future of her dynasty. Antony had risen to power in Rome and was a key figure in the triumvirate. He sought to tilt the balance of power in the Mediterranean in his favor, and Egypt's wealth made it an irresistible prize. Recognizing this opportunity, Cleopatra decided to forge an alliance with the powerful Roman general. But her plan was more than a political maneuver. It was also the beginning of one of history's most unforgettable love stories. In the magnificent harbors of Alexandria, under the golden light reflecting off the blue waters of the Mediterranean, Cleopatra first met Antony. For her, this encounter was a chance to display both her intellect and charisma. She appeared not only as the Queen of Egypt, but as a strategist capable of captivating the mind and heart of one of Rome's most powerful men. Antony was immediately captivated by Cleopatra's intelligence, wisdom, and determination. In her eyes, he saw not merely a queen, but a leader whose presence could alter the course of history. The relationship between Cleopatra and Antony deepened quickly, combining political alliance with passionate romance. Cleopatra needed Antony's support to protect Egypt and secure the future of Caesarion. Antony, in turn, used his connection with Cleopatra to expand his influence in the Mediterranean and strengthen his position against rivals in Rome. This alliance marked a period in which both their powers were mutually reinforced. During his time with Cleopatra, Antony came to fully appreciate Egypt's wealth and strategic importance. The fertile lands of the Nile, the country's treasures, and the loyalty of its people became, in his eyes, not just economic assets, but instruments of political power. Cleopatra's intelligence and governance impressed him and revealed Egypt's true value. Yet this alliance posed a threat to other powers in Rome. Octavian's rise, the Senate's growing opposition, and the manipulation of public opinion added layers of complexity to the relationship between Egypt and Rome. Cleopatra had to move carefully, crafting a strategy that would not only protect Egypt, but also use Antony's support to shift Rome's political balance in her favor. During this period, Cleopatra emerged as an active leader in both Egypt and Rome. Her life was shaped continuously by war, diplomacy, love, and betrayal. The union of Cleopatra and Antony connected not just two individuals, but the fates of two civilizations. This alliance, forged on the banks of the Nile, altered the balance of power across the Mediterranean and left an indelible mark on history. Through her intelligence and courage, Cleopatra restored Egypt as a central power while using Antony's influence in Rome to secure her throne. Yet ahead lay a long and challenging path. Rome's rising power, betrayals and wars would continually threaten both Cleopatra and the future of Egypt. The alliance between Cleopatra and Mark Antony had bound the fates of Egypt and Rome together, but this union faced a monumental test, both politically and militarily. In Rome, Octavian's rise threatened Antony's balance of power, and certain members of the Senate plotted intrigues to turn the situation against Egypt. Cleopatra was no longer just a queen. She had become a master strategist, a skilled diplomat, and a military planner. Antony and Cleopatra devised a joint strategy to consolidate their power across the Mediterranean. Egypt's vast wealth, combined with Antony's military strength in Rome, made them nearly unstoppable. Yet Octavian's disciplined and determined army constantly challenged their plans. The Roman general knew Antony's weaknesses and used propaganda and diplomacy to influence both the Egyptian populace and the Roman forces. The struggle reached its climax at the monumental confrontation known to history as the Battle of Actium. Cleopatra and Antony prepared their fleet to face Octavian's forces in the Aegean Sea. The battle was epic in every sense. Ships collided, cannons roared, and thousands of soldiers and warships sank into the waters. Throughout the conflict, Cleopatra supported Antony in commanding the fleet and making strategic decisions. Her intelligence and courage provided a crucial morale boost in the opening stages of the battle. However, Octavian's strategy proved decisive. Antony's fleet was gradually encircled, units were fragmented, and morale collapsed. Cleopatra remained composed, executing her escape plan with precision. She withdrew secretly with a small fleet, focusing on protecting her throne and her son. Antony attempted to follow her, but under the pressure of Rome's forces, he was unable to escape. After the battle, Antony returned to Egypt alongside Cleopatra. Yet their forces had suffered massive losses, leaving them vulnerable to the approaching threat of Rome. Octavian's propaganda campaigns effectively swayed public opinion and the loyalty of Antony's troops, increasingly isolating the Egyptian rulers. Although the Egyptian people had initially remained devoted to Cleopatra, Sustaining that loyalty in the face of overwhelming Roman power became increasingly difficult. During this period, the bond of love and strategy between Cleopatra and Antony determined not only the fate of Egypt, but also their personal destinies. Antony chose to stay with Cleopatra rather than return to Rome, and together they planned a final resistance. Yet Octavian's superior strategy and the disciplined might of the Roman army gradually cornered them. Inevitably, Antony found himself trapped in a deadly predicament in Egypt. Cleopatra had to employ her intelligence and courage one final time to protect both her throne and her life. Following the Battle of Actium, Egypt entered a phase of submission under Octavian's pressure. Cleopatra confronted her fate as both a queen and a strategist in one of history's most dramatic moments. This moment marked the beginning of a period in which Cleopatra lost both her love and her political power, yet cemented her legendary status in history. Her courage, wisdom, and determination left a profound impact on Egypt and the wider world, a tragic, unforgettable legacy. For Cleopatra, everything was moving toward a dark conclusion after the Battle of Actium. Antony's forces had been defeated, and Rome's armies were advancing on Egypt. Along the banks of the Nile, the once grand palaces now served only as memories of the past, their rooms lined with gold and stone, silently witnessing the approaching disaster. Cleopatra had become more than a queen. She was a mother, a strategist, and the last hope of Egypt, standing at one of history's most dramatic turning points. After the defeat at Actium, Antony returned to Egypt, broken in both morale and strength. Even at Cleopatra's side, he was powerless against Rome's overwhelming force. Together they attempted to plan a final resistance, but every move was futile against Octavian's cunning and the discipline of his armies. In despair and shame, Antony ultimately chose to end his own life, carrying thoughts of Cleopatra and Egypt in his final moments. Antony withdrew to his chambers, mortally wounded, and Cleopatra saw him one last time, her eyes filled with both love and sorrow. He died before her, leaving Cleopatra to face not only personal grief, but also political catastrophe. Yet history would continue to test her intelligence and resolve. As Octavian prepared to enter Egypt, Cleopatra had to make her final move. She needed to protect her son, Caesarion, and secure the throne while outwitting her enemy. She confronted Rome's powerful army and Octavian's strategy, knowing that this time the stakes were deeply personal and fatal. Ultimately, Cleopatra made one of history's most dramatic and tragic decisions. Rather than submit to Rome, she chose to end her own life by her own will. Legends tell that her death came by the bite of an asp, a final act of strategy even in death. This decision ensured that she would be remembered not only as a queen, but as a legend. With Cleopatra's death, the 1,000-year reign of the Ptolemaic dynasty over Egypt came to an end. Egypt fell under Octavian's control, becoming a province of Rome. Yet Cleopatra's legacy was far more enduring than the loss of a throne. Her intelligence, courage, and charisma would live on in the imagination of historians, artists, and the public for centuries. Her story became a saga of love, power, intrigue, and tragedy. Although Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt, died, she was never forgotten on the stage of history. Her name continues to endure as a legendary figure where strategy, power, and love converge, immortal in the annals of time.